What would happen if, in response to the Capitol Hill insurrection, we passed some really great anti-domestic terrorism laws, and then we get President Tom Cotton and he decides that you and I are the terrorists? Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. In Brooklyn, New York. Hey, Roger, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I asked you online, but I haven't been able to keep up with the clip here. But I'm just wondering if you could just explain your opinion, beliefs on pushing for a domestic terrorism bill and why you felt that it's not a good idea.
Sure. Broadly speaking, I mean, if you go back and you look at the debates around the Patriot Act, or arguably the non-debate around the Patriot Act in 2001 and early 2002, the Patriot Act allowed the federal government to go beyond what the Constitution provides in terms of protections of due process. And the argument that was made was, well, we're not doing this for American citizens. These powers will only be powers that the government can use overseas. In other words, we can violate our own core principles when we do it to foreign actors, when we do it to terrorists in Afghanistan, bin Laden and his buddies. And so Americans kind of swallowed hard and went along with that. If we were to pass domestic terrorism legislation, just that word terrorism now has, as a consequence of a whole bunch of laws that have been passed, mostly since 2001, but some of them go back all the way to the 60s. Actually, some of them go back to the late 19th century, and they were used mostly against the civil rights movement. But when you designate somebody a terrorist, or a group as a terrorist group, under federal law, they lose a whole bunch of rights. And I'm all in favor of tracking down and finding groups of American citizens who are trying to overthrow our government, who are trying to foster racial violence, who are trying to, the things that we're actually seeing happen right in front of us. But to use the tools of the so-called war on terror that go beyond, that basically suspend our constitutional rights, in my opinion, is a very dangerous thing. I would have a fairly moderate to high level of confidence that a Biden administration, for example, would not abuse those tools. But if Josh Hawley or Tom Cotton became president, I'm guessing, Roger, that you and I would both be labeled domestic terrorists, and they'd be all over us. So that's why I don't think we should do that. Yeah,
I hear that. But, so what do you suggest, though? The thing, like people like Frank Figliuzzi, former FBI agent who I listen to on MSNBC, and other counterterrorism experts, he personally had said that we should get a domestic terrorist bill. But the problem being, and with what's happening is now a lot of these Capitol insurrectionists, they're being, what a lot of us are saying, prematurely released from prison. And they're not being tried to the fullest extent of the law. And, people like Frank Figliuzzi are saying, if we had the bill on the books, we could streamline the whole process and really go after these white supremacists, nationalists, militias.
Conspiracy to commit an insurrection, Roger, is already a 20-year federal felony. It's not that we don't have laws that can be used against these people. It's that we have prosecutors, and I think in many cases prosecutors who consider themselves right-wing Republicans, because that's very common among police and prosecutors, who are unwilling to use those laws. If I was going to make any change in our laws, I would update the RICO statute. The Racketeering Influence and Corrupt Organization law, the RICO law, is very narrowly tailored to go after the mafia. And with half a dozen relatively modest tweaks that would not blow up our constitutional rights. It's basically an anti-conspiracy law, right? It's that an organization has turned from being a legitimate organization, a public interest group or an advocacy group, into a criminal enterprise, and it's very difficult right now. Well, it's very difficult to do that, and that's the problem, because the RICO laws are so narrowly tailored for organized crime, that it's very difficult to use them on these circumstances. And so that's the one area where I would have some give in my wariness of giving the government more power. But, I mean, remember the FBI tracked Martin Luther King around for years and years and finally discovered him having an affair, recorded it, and sent him the recording and said, commit suicide, or we're going to send this to your wife. I mean, that's government power can be a dangerous, destructive thing. Now, that was done outside of government power, but that kind of behavior we don't ever want to sanction. But I think that the conspiracy laws grounded in the RICO statutes could be updated to include political violence. It would have to be violence. That would have to be the key to the whole thing. But again, be very, very careful, because you get Josh Hawley as president in 4 years, or Tom Cotton, and they're going to take that law and they're going to point it right at Black Lives Matter, and you know it as well as I do. So we've got to be,
Thank you, Tom.
In every case, thank you, Roger. In every case, we've got to look at how can this law be used, and more importantly, how can it be abused, because inevitably it will be.